The cameras were already rolling when he said it. A 25-year-old deckhand, standing on the deck of a crab boat 170 miles north of Dutch Harbor, looked directly at the lens and told his children to chase their dreams. 3 weeks later, he fell overboard into water barely above freezing, and Discovery Channel had the footage. They chose not to air it. That decision, and everything that led up to the moment it had to be made, is the story of what Deadliest Catch has actually become after 22 years on the Bering Sea. By the time this is over, you will understand why this show is still running, why the people on it keep coming back, and why the real cost of what you have been watching is bigger than anyone on television has ever quite said out loud. April 12, 2005. A camera crew boarded a working crab boat in Dutch Harbor, Alaska, and started filming. No celebrities, no scripted drama, just men in orange survival suits, 40-foot swells, and enough raw danger that the insurance paperwork alone probably took weeks. Discovery Channel's pitch was simple. Crab fishing in the Bering Sea is statistically one of the most lethal jobs in America. Fatality rates run roughly 35 times higher than the national workforce average. Put cameras on the boats and let people watch. That's it. Nobody predicted what happened next. Season 3 pulled in more than 49 million viewers across its run. 3 million people tuned in per first-run episode. In a cable landscape already crowded with reality formats, Deadliest Catch had done something almost nobody saw coming. It had made honest labor look like the most compelling thing on television. The secret wasn't danger, though. Plenty of shows leaned into danger. The secret was the captains. Sig Hansen of the FV Northwestern, a Norwegian-American fishing dynasty's third generation, built like a refrigerator, quiet in the way that only people who've earned quiet can be. The Hillstrand brothers on the Time Bandit, loud, combustible, and genuinely hilarious. Keith Colburn of The Wizard, who could turn a bad crab pull into a philosophical argument. And then there was Phil Harris. Captain Phil Harris of the FV Cornelia Marie was the show's heartbeat before anyone had a name for it. He started fishing with his father at age 8. He was running his own vessel by 21, the youngest crab boat captain on the Bering Sea. He smoked constantly, laughed loudly, fished without apology, and brought his sons Josh and Jake onto the boat as crew. He was the working-class patriarch the show had been built to document, a man who had chosen an impossible life and refused to treat it as a burden. And here's what made the early seasons so different from everything else on cable at the time. The show never asked you to root against anyone. Every boat was trying. Every captain was the hero of his own story. Most reality television manufactured conflict between people. Deadliest Catch found something rarer. Genuine competition between people who also genuinely respected each other. But here's the part that changes everything about what you just heard. The moment that defined Deadliest Catch, the one that separated it permanently from the genre it technically belonged to, happened on a dock in St. Paul Island, Alaska, on January 29, 2010. Phil Harris had been complaining of tiredness for days. He went below deck to get pain medication and collapsed. Second-year engineer Steve Ward found him on the floor of his stateroom, conscious but unable to move his left leg or his left hand. He had suffered a massive stroke. His sons Josh and Jake were called to his side. The camera crew was still rolling. Harris was flown to a hospital in Anchorage and placed in a medically induced coma. The early signs were extraordinary. He was improving faster than his doctors expected. He was squeezing hands, talking, responding. Then, 11 days later, on February 9, 2010, Phil Harris died of an intracranial hemorrhage at age 53. What happened next says more about who this show was than anything that came before it. Phil Harris, on his own, had insisted the cameras keep filming. He knew what was happening to him. He wanted the record to exist. The Season 6 finale, Redemption Day, built to those final moments with such restraint. No dramatic narration, no manufactured build-up, just footage of Josh Harris in a waiting room as word comes through that television critics who had never watched a single episode of the show suddenly had to reckon with it. The episode drew 8.5 million viewers, the highest in the show's history. The season won Deadliest Catch its first Emmy Award. The critical consensus at the time described it as a show that had smuggled integrity into a morally bankrupt genre. Phil Harris had been on television for 6 years. He died on television, and his death had been handled with more dignity than most fictional dramas ever manage. The show continued. Josh Harris eventually purchased the Cornelia Marie. Jake Harris, Phil's younger son, struggled deeply in the years that followed, eventually departing the show in 2012. The boat his father had captained became a kind of floating memorial, still out on the Bering Sea, still pulling crab, but carrying a weight that everyone involved understood. What happened next is the reason this story spread across the internet. For 17 seasons, the central challenge of Deadliest Catch was simple: find the crab, haul it in, survive the weather. The ocean was brutal but reliable. Then, in 2018, the Bering Sea began to change in ways that no amount of seamanship could fix. A marine heat wave descended on the eastern Bering Sea. Water temperatures climbed to 3.5 degrees Celsius in 2018, nearly 2 degrees above the 20-year average. Snow crabs are ectothermic, meaning their body temperature matches their environment. When the sea warmed, their metabolism accelerated. Their caloric demands spiked, and at the population densities the Bering Sea had been carrying, there simply was not enough food to sustain them. Scientists later estimated that approximately 47 billion snow crabs disappeared, not overfished, not migrated, died, most likely from starvation driven by a warming ocean. It was one of the largest marine die-offs ever documented. NOAA eventually declared it a federal fishery disaster. In October 2022, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game did something it had never done in the history of that fishery. It canceled the Bering Sea snow crab season entirely. Bristol Bay red king crab was also closed, both of them. The two species the show had been built around, gone from the fishing calendar in a single announcement. A fishing fleet that had survived decades of brutal seas suddenly had no catch to make. The human cost beyond the television show was severe. The town of St. Paul Island, a small indigenous Unangan community that had staked its economic survival on the crab processing industry after the fur seal trade ended in the 1980s, lost approximately 70% of its annual tax revenue in a single year. The local government froze hiring, laid off workers, and eventually shut down its police department. The mayor wrote to federal officials warning that the crisis threatened the community's ability to function. The closures extended through the 2023-24 season, 2 consecutive years with no crab. The show pivoted to golden king crab, Bertie, and cod. Production continued, but the emotional core of the format, men racing against a quota, pulling king crab from the sea, was gone. For the first time in its history, Deadliest Catch was fishing for something it had never needed to fish for before, a reason to keep going. Most people who know this story stop here, but the real story starts right now. Jake Anderson had not been born into this. That was always the thing that made his arc different from the Hansen dynasty, different from the Harris family legacy, different from everyone else on the show who had grown up on water. Anderson came from skateboarding. He turned professional young, built up sponsorships, believed he had found his path. Then he was injured. The career ended. The sponsorship money dried up. He struggled with addiction. He spent time without stable housing. He was, by his own account in interviews and in his memoir, at the lowest point a person can reach before finding a reason to climb. He joined the Deadliest Catch crew in 2007 as a greenhorn on the FV Northwestern, the lowest-ranking position on the boat, assigned to the hardest and most dangerous work under Sig Hansen. He was 23 years old and had no idea what he was doing. He learned. 5 years later, he was promoted to deck boss. Eventually, he earned his captain's license. In 2015, Anderson invested his life savings into part ownership of the FV saga. He built something from nothing. By season 19, he was running his own vessel, making his own decisions, carrying his own crew. He had the most king crab to catch when the 2023 season opened, the biggest quota he had ever held. Then, on a Friday in August 2023, he went down to the dock and found a padlock on the boat. There was a repossession notice. His co-owner, Lenny Herzog, had been handling the financial side of the partnership, while Anderson focused on operations. What exactly happened? Anderson himself said he didn't know and couldn't say publicly because of ongoing legal matters. But the outcome was not ambiguous. The boat was gone. The quota was unreachable. Anderson had put his children's college fund into the saga. Now there was nothing. He later said in an interview, "I went from having the most king crab to catch and having a nice platform I built with my own 2 hands, to losing it all over a weekend." There was one person he could call, the same one who had trained him almost 2 decades earlier. Sig Hansen, who was not obligated to do anything, who had his own crew, his own boat, his own season, offered Anderson a spot on the Northwestern. The man who had once been Anderson's greenhorn captain became his employer again. Anderson took it. He called it a humble pill to swallow. He swallowed it. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. Sig Hansen has been the face of Deadliest Catch since the beginning. He was there in Season 1, he was there in Season 22. No captain in the show's history has been more consistent, more present, or more central to its identity. He is also 59 years old, with a documented history of cardiac events that would have convinced most men to stay on shore a long time ago. In 2016, filming an episode of Deadliest Catch, Hansen felt a sharp pain behind his chest plate. He described it later, like a knife, just kept pushing. Tests confirmed he had suffered a full heart attack. A blood clot had lodged in one of his arteries. He received treatment at sea that he later said saved his life. He quit smoking after that incident, or at least he said he did. In October 2018, he had a second, smaller cardiac event triggered by an allergic reaction to antibiotics he was taking for a sinus infection. Then came the Season 21 finale. In October 2025, Hansen was found collapsed on the FV Northwestern. He had been awake for approximately a day and a half. By his own admission, he had been drinking somewhere between 15 and 20 cups of coffee during that stretch. He was still smoking. His doctor recommended retirement. Hansen's response to the doctor on camera was essentially, "I don't see that happening." But something had shifted. He told People magazine, "I think about it all the time, and when I do think about retiring, it's only because I've lost so many people, and I'm more fearful every time we go out on the water. A part of it is just you think about your own mortality, and I'm fearful." He also acknowledged, with unusual self-deprecation, that his past insistence he would never retire now looked different. His words, "I'm a fisherman. You've got to remember, you're talking to a professional liar here." His daughter Mandy Hansen has been captaining her own vessel. His son-in-law Clark is working alongside him on the Northwestern. Hansen has said both are capable of running the operation without him. The transition, if it comes, is ready. It has not come yet. One phone call, one conversation, that's all it took to change the direction of everything. The show has buried people since the beginning. That is not a criticism of it. It is a fact about the industry it documents. Commercial fishing kills at a rate almost no other occupation matches. The cameras simply record that reality. Nick Mavar spent nearly 2 decades on the FV Northwestern as what Sig Hansen called his right-hand man. He appeared in close to 100 episodes across the show's run. In 2020, his appendix ruptured while filming, leading to the discovery of a cancerous tumor. He left the show to recover. On June 13, 2024, he died of a heart attack in a boatyard in Naknek, Alaska. He was 59 years old. He was working when it happened. Tom Brossard, engineer on the FV Saga and Jake Anderson's closest friend in the industry, died of a heart attack on January 27, 2024. He was 64. Anderson, informed of Brossard's death during Season 20 filming, said on camera, "He was my best friend over the last 9 years. He taught me everything I know about boats." These were not men who died on camera. They were men the show had followed for years, and then they were gone, and the show noted their absence the way any close community notes the loss of its own. Then came February 25, 2026, and Todd Meadows. Here's what the comments kept asking, and here's the answer they never got, until now. Todd Meadows was 25 years old. He had joined the Aleutian Lady as a deckhand in May 2025. Captain Rick Shelford described him as the newest member of the crew, who quickly became family. Someone whose work ethic and smile left an impression on everyone aboard almost immediately. Before the accident, the cameras had filmed Meadows talking to the lens, with the directness that the show has always drawn out of people who are truly working for something. He said he had dreamed of fishing in Alaska. He had visited the state before, but only as a tourist. Everything on the Bering Sea felt scaled up. The smells, the cold, the scale of the water. He acknowledged that the work carried real risk, and then he looked into the camera and told his children, directly, clearly, in language that had no performance in it, to go after their goals. Don't let anything slow you down. On February 25, 2026, 170 miles north of Dutch Harbor, Meadows fell overboard. The water temperature was approximately 1 to 2 degrees above freezing. His fellow deckhand later described what happened as something none of the crew could fully understand even afterward. The Aleutian Lady was equipped with cameras at the time of the incident. Discovery had footage. They chose not to air it. In a statement, they explained the decision was made out of respect for Meadows' family and loved ones. Season 22 opened instead with Meadows' earlier footage. His words to his children, a photograph, a caption, "In memory of Todd Meadows, 2000-2026. That is how Deadliest Catch has handled death for 22 years. With restraint, with the understanding that there is a difference between documenting a dangerous life and exploiting the moment that life ends. The show has not always gotten that balance exactly right. But in the case of Todd Meadows, it got it right. Season 22 is currently airing on Discovery. The fleet this season has relocated 225 miles north to St. George Island, chasing a king crab population that has shifted further toward the Arctic as ocean temperatures continue to change. The boats are moving where the crab is, the way they have always moved. The Bering Sea is still out there, and every season the same question sits underneath everything the cameras film. Who makes it back? 22 seasons in, Deadliest Catch is something rare on American television, a show that started as a spectacle and became a record. A documentation of people who choose the hardest version of the work because it is the only version they know how to want. Phil Harris went out fishing with his sons. Jake Anderson rebuilt himself from nothing, lost everything, and kept fishing. Sig Hansen collapsed on his boat and told his doctor he was not ready to stop. Todd Meadows filmed a message to his children about chasing dreams, and then went out on the deck to work and did not come home. The ocean took something it had no business taking. The cameras were rolling. The footage will not be aired. What comes next for Deadliest Catch may depend on whether Sig Hansen is still on that boat, whether Jake Anderson can find a vessel of his own again, and whether the crab stocks now shifting north toward St. George Island hold long enough for another generation of fishermen to stake their lives on them. The show will return. The Bering Sea will still be out there. The question is, who else it keeps? So here is what I want to know. Do you think Sig Hansen should walk away from the Northwestern, or do you think a man who has fished his entire life deserves the right to make that call himself?